Chapter 2. Shrill beeping pierced through drifting, filmy clouds. Mouth opened his eyes and groaned. For a couple seconds, he managed to cling to the sensation of buoyancy left over from his sleep. But the beeping continued, piercing and insistent. Mike flung out his left hand and slapped it toward what he thought was the top of the cheap plastic digital alarm clock that sat next to the battered metal desk lamp on his rickety nightstand. Instead of hitting the alarm, Mike's hand landed on the cassette player near the lamp. He felt his fingers brush against a paperback book, and then he heard the book swish off the nightstand and hit the thin carpet on its hardwood floor with a soft thud. Mike pulled his hand back. His fingers, in full-on early morning klezmer mode, once again bumped something. This time, it was the plastic bottle of Mike's pills. Mike heard the bottle tippity-tap down the side of the nightstand and land on the carpet with a shushing sound. He cringed, hoping he'd remembered to put the cap on tight. Mike started to sit up, but the motion sent what felt like a jagged shard of glass through his temporal lobe. Mike clutched at his head. The glass shard started moving around in his skull. The alarm's continued screechy beep seemed to drive the shard even deeper into his brain. Mike squinted toward his nightstand and once again attempted to turn off the alarm. This time, his palm hit its target. The infernal noise stopped. Mike groaned again and rubbed his temples. Sighing, he swung his legs out of bed and reached for the glass next to the cassette player. At least he managed not to knock that over. The glass was still half full of water. Mike guzzled it and set the glass back down. Mike's bare feet shifted, and his right one encountered his prescription pill bottle. Wincing as he bent over, because the motion intensified his headache, Mike picked up the dark amber plastic container. Thankfully, he had put the cap on the bottle. The little white prescribed pills, a couple dozen of them, were still safely inside. Mike stuffed the pill bottle under his mattress, just a few inches from the edge. Then he leaned over again, gritting his teeth against the increased japping in his head. He picked up his Dream Theory paperback. Setting the book next to the cassette player, Mike hit the rewind button on the machine. Once the cassette tape started its whispery whir of motion, Mike managed to calmly inhale. Finally, his morning routine was starting to fall into place. Usually, Mike's first emotions after waking up were rote. Hit the alarm, hide the pills, rewind the tape. This morning, the unusually high pain level of his headache had turned Mike's routine into a one-stooge show. The tape's smooth rewind settled him back into a sense of normalcy. "Okay," Mike said. He stroked his hands through his hair. Standing, Mike took a couple of steps away from his bed and planted his feet at the edge of his threadbare pale blue and gray rag rug. He stretched his arms overhead and willed himself to ignore his headache. Mike dropped to the floor and began doing push-ups. Not counting, Mike lowered and lifted himself over and over and over. Beneath Mike's palms, the carpet felt scratchy and dirty. Vaguely, he tried to remember when he'd last vacuumed his room. Lifting his head as he pumped his body up and down, Mike took in the familiar sparsity of his space. The nearly empty room, it had only his narrow bed and the small nightstand, was nothing but a bare cell, a cell that kept Mike separate from the world. Even his one window, which might have reminded him that a reality existed beyond his own suffering, was covered by heavy blackout curtains. Dropping his head again, Mike continued to pound out his push-ups. The routine, though painful, comforted him, as did his prison-like surroundings, and he might be able to face his day. Abby bent over her drawing pad and concentrated on getting the image just right. Tucking her tongue between her teeth, she dragged her pencil across the page in a long curved line. Pulling back, she frowned. Did that look all right? Not sure. Abby lifted her gaze. She looked out through the opening and the hidey tent that surrounded her. Constructed from blankets held into place by her white painted nightstand, her matching small desk, and one edge of her squat bureau, also white but not matching. Abby's tent snugged up to her bed, a bed she didn't like nearly as much as she liked the cozy confines of the hidey tent. With 2 fluffy pillows on its floor and another blanket scrunched up around the pillows, the inside of Abby's hidey tent was like a little nest that made Abby feel like a safe and cared-for baby bird. The pillows and the blanket smelled like the detergent they were washed in. Abby had seen the detergent box. It was labeled rain scented. Abby didn't think the detergent smelled like rain, but it didn't smell bad. It was kind of sweet and fruity. That meant that the inside of Abby's tent was sweet and fruity too. Abby liked it in her hidey tent. She could handle almost anything when she was tucked inside of it. Take, for instance, the grunting coming from her brother's room. Mike was doing push-ups again, and Abby wished she didn't have to listen to him. He clearly didn't like doing them. Abby could tell that from all the moans and groans. When Mike did the push-ups, Abby felt bad, as if something hard was poking her in the belly. She didn't like feeling like that. Although inside Abby's hidey tent it was cool and dim, a fat ray of sun was sweeping past the tent's opening. The sun ray landed on the wall opposite the tent. Many of Abby's completed drawings covered the wall. Abby used the drawings as nudges to help her draw better. Although most of the things in the drawings were stick figures, some of them were more real looking. Abby was getting better at drawing. That made her feel good. Not a lot made Abby feel good. Forever and ever, Abby had felt like she didn't really know how to be. No one seemed to want her around much. Not her brother, not a babysitter, Max, not the kids at school or the ones at the development center. Well, no one wasn't quite right. Dr. Lillian seemed to like having Abby around. Dr. Lillian was the one who got Abby all the cool colored drawing pencils she used now. Dr. Lillian said Abby was talented beyond 10 years old. That meant Abby drew better than other kids her age. Drawing made Abby feel special. So did the things she drew. Drawing was Abby's way into a world that she liked being in. It was a world where she was wanted. A sharp knock sounded on Abby's flimsy wood door. Abby put aside a drawing pad and pulled close the 2 sections of blanket that formed the opening of her tent. She picked up Dolph, her plush dolphin. Through the narrow crack between the blankets, she looked toward the scarred, pale brown surface of her door. "Abby!" Mike called out from the other side of Abby's not castle door. Abby didn't answer her brother. "Are you ready, Abs?" "My name's not Abs," Abby whispered. "My name's Abby, and I'm not here." Abby's not thick and not locked door opened. Mike stuck his head into Abby's private space. He looked toward Abby's bed, then shifted his gaze to the crack in the blankets that Abby peered through. Abby clearly heard her brother's loud sigh. Abby stared at Mike's feet as he headed toward her hidey tent. Her brother wore a pair of black dress socks. They were faded and stretched out, so they kind of crumpled around his ankles, and both socks were full of holes. His left big toe stuck out through the largest of the ragged openings. The sock-covered feet stopped really close to the front of Abby's hidey tent. The feet, or maybe it was Mike himself, smelled sweaty. Abby wrinkled her nose and put her face into Dolph's soft ear. Dolph wasn't as clean as the blankets in Abby's hidey tent, so he didn't smell sweet and fruity. But he didn't smell bad. He smelled kind of like Abby, and Abby smelled like lemons because her shampoo smelled like lemons. "Abby," Mike said, "I know you're awake." Abby squeezed her eyes shut. She heard whisper movements, and she felt the blanket flaps of her hidey tent separate. Mike let out another long, loud sigh. "Abby!" As Abby kept her eyes closed, Dolph pressed against her face. She didn't move. A scrape, a fluttering sound. Abby felt air whisk over her bare arms. She opened her eyes. Mike was shaking one of the chairs that held part of her hidey tent in place. Okay, Abby yelled. Mike's head poked through the hidey tent's flaps. His hair stuck up all weird. She thought it looked stupid that way, but he might have done it on purpose. Some of the boys at school had their hair like that. Abby thought about her own hair. It probably looked stupid at the moment, too. Her hair always went all over the place when she slept, and it was thick and fine like her brother's, so it tangled easily. Abby glared at Mike. "You're being a jerk," Abby said. Mike rolled his eyes. When Mike rolled his eyes, Abby sometimes felt like she was looking at her own eyes in someone else's head. Abby's and Mike's eyes were a lot alike, even though his were lighter brown than hers. They called his hazel. Their eyes sloped down at the outside edge, like they were a little sad all the time. That made sense, actually. Besides their eyes and the black, thick, slightly wavy hair they both had, Abby didn't think she and Mike looked much alike. Mike's face was kind of hard, like his skin was stretched over metal or wood. Abby's face was softer and rounder. Mike jostled the hidey tent again. "Come on, Abby. I have somewhere to be. You know that." Abby makes Mike sigh. "It's not my fault you lost your job at the mall." Abby sighed a second time. She knew that getting ice cream from the dairy freeze was not something that was going to happen much anymore, if ever. Mike had gotten a discount from the food court when he'd worked there. No more discount, no more ice cream. "You're right about that," Mike said. Abby knew he was talking about the job, not the ice cream she was thinking of. "If I'm late, that will be your fault." Mike lightly kicked the side out of the blanket tent. 5 minutes. I want you dressed." Abby stuck her tongue out at Mike. He copied her. She thought their tongues might have looked a little alike, but his was bigger. Mike turned to leave the room. Abby looked at Dolph and raised an eyebrow at him. The dolphin seemed to go along with her idea, so she threw him through the opening of the hidey tent. Dolph arced through the air and plowed his blunt nose into the middle of Mike's back. As Dolph dropped to the yellow and green braided rug that covered Abby's wood floor, Mike turned around. Abby looked at Mike's feet. "Nice socks," she said. "You want to talk?" "You want to talk," Mike said. He turned and left her room. Abby crawled out of her tent and scooted forward to rescue Dolph. She scrambled upward and looked down at her own feet. She wore one red and white striped sock and one yellow polka-dotted sock. Abby shrugged and hugged Dolph close. He didn't seem to care about her mismatched socks. Mike glanced up at the gray clouds that hung so low and felt like they were pressing him down into the cracked concrete walkway that led up to the sad, rectangular brick building he didn't want to go into. The building, whose simple, downtrodden architecture shouted, "Underfunded government office," looked like it could barely hold its own under the overbearing stratus clouds. Mike hated stratus clouds. They were always iron-like and depressing, and they were spineless, all show and no substance. Stratus clouds made the sky dark and threatening, but they actually held very little precipitation. Mike had learned that in science class, and for some reason he remembered it. Maybe that was because he felt a little like a stratus cloud himself. Mike hesitated at the base of the shallow steps leading into the building in front of him. How many times had he been in this miserable place? He'd lost count. Mike kicked loose a piece of crumbling concrete from one of the steps. He found the crunching sound satisfying. Squaring his shoulders, Mike slogged up the steps and went into the building. The interior of the building that housed the city's social services offices was even uglier than the exterior. With dirty cream walls and industrial-grade faded brown carpet, the lobby and main hall weren't much more attractive than a sewer. Not that Mike had ever been in a sewer. This place was close enough. Shuffling forward, Mike plucked a number from a scarred black number dispenser near the counter at the far side of the lobby. He looked at the little piece of paper in his hand. Number 27. He looked up at the dimly lit number display on the wall. The number 11 flickered anemically under the fluorescent lights that cast a harsh glare over everything. "Great," Mike muttered. Mike dragged his feet across the numbly carpet as he headed toward a line of molded plastic chairs along the left wall of the lobby. The other 26 people who held paper numbers, along with their spouses or children or friends, Mike had none of the above, crowded the relatively small area. However, an end chair was open. Mike headed toward it and took a seat. As soon as he sat, he used his butt to scooch the chair away from its neighbor. The middle-aged woman who sat on the adjacent chair was large, and her sweatpants encased thighs encroached into Mike's space. Mike felt the woman's gaze on him as he repositioned the chair. He heard her huff, but he didn't glance up. Looking into the eyes of the other people waiting to see a social worker, you could get swallowed by a mire of life-sucking depression if you made eye contact with the other people in this building. Everyone here was in one crummy situation or another. Dealing with his own baggage was hard enough. Mike didn't need to get a glimpse of anyone else's. Even though Mike didn't see the others in the room, he could sense them. Their presence felt like the bars of a cell. Mike could smell and hear the people around him, too. The waiting area was filled with sounds, nervously shuffling feet, sniffles, coughs, throat clearing, a couple weak sobs, and murmuring voices. Even though Mike didn't want to hear about other people's problems, some snippets of conversation got past his intention to mind his own business.
So I say to him,
one whining female voice related,
I say, you can't just do that to another person. Where are you supposed to go when you throw us out?
A deep male voice on the other side of the room boomed, loudly enough to be heard outside the building. Man can't put food on the table with the peanuts they try to pay. Mike mentally plugged his ears and stared at his feet. Tuning out his surroundings, Mike disappeared into his favorite game. What would I be doing if I was... Mike liked to play out all sorts of imaginary scenarios when he indulged in this game. Sometimes he was a reporter or a travel photographer. Sometimes he was a scientist or a doctor or a judge. Most often, Mike was a contractor, the head honcho in the charge of building big houses or interesting office buildings. Not buildings like this one. Never ever was Mike a security guard, or a janitor, or a mail clerk, or an unemployed loser looking for whatever work he could find. Mike knew that playing this kind of make-believe game was something he should have outgrown years ago. But letting himself imagine a life different than the one he lived was what allowed him to get up in the morning and put one foot in front of the other. When Mike dropped into being pretend Mike instead of real Mike, he could work with a clean slate. He could stow all the baggage, all the disappointment, all the guilt. And if he couldn't put that away from time to time, the weight of it probably would have driven him up the wall by now. Or killed him. Mike wasn't sure which would have been worse.
Number 27.
Mike looked up. Already? A 40-something woman with a tight perm and eyes that looked like they'd seen little more than an hour or two of sleep per night for years looked around the room. Mike lifted a hand and got her attention. The woman tugged on the hem of her wrinkled orange blouse. The blouse clashed, Mike thought, with the woman's rust-colored skirt. The skirt hung crooked on the woman's skinny hips. The skirt was 2 inches above the woman's right knee and an inch below the left.
Number 27.
The woman called out to Mike. Mike nodded.
Follow me,
the woman said. Mike stood.